time for another draftphysics.com, debatephysics.com, also video presentation. So in this video I'm going to use Professor Dave as just an example of pontificating douchebag pretending to know better, to be smarter or something, and using like straw man arguments against like this big evil force that's coming to get science. And it hasn't done anything wrong, and it's innocent, and it's so pure and perfect that how could anybody find any criticism at all? And it's just pigeonholing all disagreement as being poorly motivated rubbish, and discounting it and running away from any kind of fair argument about the mistakes physics has made. And there are a lot of them. I mean, like almost every single subject they got wrong. Anytime they could mess it up and screw it up, they did. In deference to fables, in deference to the silliest, dumbest, most idiotic explanations possible. And that's the truth. So it's just another religion, and it doesn't have any God in it, but it has all of the magical crap and all of, well, it's like even religion doesn't have all that much magic now anyway, right? I mean, I guess you could argue that miracles, imply, but we know none of that ever happened, so we know that it's not a real thing in religion. And it's just all over the place in physics. It's explanations for which they don't have to provide any hard evidence, and it's all a bunch of tricks. It's all a bunch of pulling pigeons and rabbits out of hats and whatnot, and saying therefore I made rabbit. Not that it's a trick. No, I just made rabbits. I mean, go through the history of physics, which I have explained, and there were stupid mistakes, innocent ones like Benjamin Franklin misassigning plus and minus, and physics deciding to never fix it, because to fix it they have to fix Maxwell's equation, so they don't want to be bothered. Anyway, so I'm going to play this video where he says, it's called Calling All Scientists. So just the idea that they claim this territory, they're all indoctrinated, Catholics, essentially, and they're just arguing that all the other religions are wrong and their little special religion is right, and they need to keep, I don't know, are they ever going to show anything, or really prove anything, or really even acknowledge the scientific method? I mean, they don't have any principles. They're afraid of debate. And that's just obvious. You can't go find anywhere where any fundamental premise of physics can be debated without the arrogant pontificators just shutting anybody who makes any kind of statement saying you might have got that wrong, and shutting them off. And I've tried to bribe them to the table, and I can't get them to, at any price, frankly. They'll say $1 million, but yeah, obviously I'm not paying you $1 million to make a response video. That's idiotic. To acknowledge that there's an argument and you haven't addressed it, that's, I shouldn't have to pay $1 million to have you at least concede that you haven't addressed the argument, because you haven't. And you won't, because the fact is you can't defend the story you're writing, because it's all just fables. It's all jump to conclusions. It's horses way ahead of the cart, the evidence cart. So they've got the conclusion horse way in front. They haven't waited for the evidence. They've forced the evidence. So I'll explain us. Go through all of these subjects, and I'll interpose little bits of this arrogant turd telling everybody what they have to believe.
Debunks are likely aware that I consistently highlight the anti-establishment narrative as the hallmark of science denial.
So whatever that means, right? I mean, any anti-establishment arguments are somehow science denial. I don't even, it's impossible to even understand what that general statement is. The fact is that these are all legitimate subjects to be argued, because a little bit of it is foggy and gray, and they're pretending it's not. So let's understand, they debated the concept of energy for 150 years. And the fact is, nobody proved anything with decisive good evidence. They pulled rabbits out of hats and said, see, you can make rabbits. That's all they did. That's the actual history. All right.
Anti-science propaganda almost always...
So anti-science propaganda, this isn't a threat, right? So this is all about flat earth and religious creationism. Now, there's nothing you can do about the faith-based morons, okay? I mean, obviously they don't have a scientific mind, they don't have a logical mind, they don't demand evidence, they just want to believe, and they want everybody else to believe, because they're embarrassed to be proven to be assholes and idiots, so they have to force the rest of the world to believe their nonsense. I mean, it is that ridiculous. The Muslims will actually kill you if you're not as stupid as them. I mean, that's all it's really about. If you're not dumb and gullible, they'll kill you. Pathetic. So yes, that's pathetic, but that doesn't have anything to do with science denial. They're not denying science. They're ridiculing it and dismissing it, but they're not really making an argument. They're presuming that they're basically saying, this Professor Dave asshole is basically saying, the odds of science making a mistake is higher. It's more unlikely than flat Earth being true. They're so arrogant. And they're so arrogant based on just rubbish and garbage as evidence. And it's not, like I said, some of it's just obviously illogical. For example, we know all the forces move the speed of light, and yet they've taken gravity and separated it as some sort of magical thing that doesn't happen because any force acts. And it's moving the same speed. I mean, that's a huge obstacle to get over. If you're going to say it's not related, it's not the same stuff as charge and electricity and magnetism and light, which all move the same speed, and gravity. I'm just saying, to take it out, exclude it, you've really got to have a good reason to do that. And they don't have any good reasoning. Einstein says so. With no evidence. I mean, Einstein didn't show you a big pile of evidence. Nothing. He just suggested there's a bent geodesic that does it for free. There's no mechanism. It just happens. That was his explanation. Newton wouldn't do that. I mean, Newton could have said, yeah, it just is. It's the way it is. The universe does this thing, bent, nothing. It's just like it's a bent nothing. Yeah, of course, anybody could have said, yes, it's just like a bent nothing. What the hell is that's not an explanation of anything. They already knew about the inverse square law. Einstein just said a bent nothing did it, instead of coming up with a real explanation.
Seeks to devalue the scientific community and academia in general.
Right, and they're not succeeding, so who are they making an argument to that they're convincing? So is anybody smarter than them being convinced? No chance. So this is obviously no threat whatsoever. And it's just they're using this paranoid bullshit that they're out to get us, scientists, as an excuse to hide some more from reality. And the fact that they really should tie this nonsense up, justify the insane waste of resources. They, these stupid Higgs boson bullshit and the fucking gravitational waves, billions of dollars on absolute useless physics.
So as to prop up unqualified lying frauds or push a narrative.
So that's all these people really are, is unqualified lying frauds. I mean, they're not qualified by anything but reading somebody's book of catechism beliefs. That's it. They did some math, and now that qualifies them to decide what what is convincing or complete evidence. And they haven't done their work here. They're not detectives. They're bad cops. They're enforcers of a belief system.
narrative that runs contrary to established facts. Want people to believe your lies over the consensus of the entire global scientific community?
So again, yeah, that's all they're really about. It's a community. We believe, you must believe what we believe. They're just as bad as religious garbage, and they're just as cowardly in the fact that they will not address the arguments. They'll just keep running from them. So on the website, I have them all listed: thrust, energy, gravity. They're all listed. The arguments are all made to how everything they are claiming to be a proven fact is not, in fact, proven. And there's really good reason to doubt all of it. So let's talk about energy. So that's in the two forms, 1/2 mv squared and mgh. So the first thing, the mv squared thing, again, its history is horrible. It was called the living force. It was invented by an insanely religious fanatic. And there was absolutely no evidence produced. They just made the claim that 4 pounds dropped 1 foot is the same impact energy as 1 pound dropped 4 feet. And 1 pound dropped 4 feet is only going twice the velocity. So basically, it's a 1 mass going twice the velocity equals a 4 mass going 1 velocity, when they have, one of them has only half the momentum, and yet they're going to argue it can do more work somewhere, that it'll knock down more bowling pins, that it'll do something, and it won't. And so the end conclusion of that belief is their statement, which is a logical consequence of this idiotic formula, is the idea that it takes 25 times the fuel to move something 5 times as fast, or to spin something 5 times as fast, to evade relativity mush. And everybody who's smarter than a flat earther, anyone who's not a flat earther, should concede, yeah, the world doesn't look like that. I mean, my experience driving a car, I don't use 25 times the fuel to go from 10 miles an hour to 50 miles an hour. Not even close. I don't even use 5 times the fuel. Nowhere close to 25. And obviously they've talked about how car crashes get quadratically higher damage, but there's no evidence of that. So we have no physical evidence. The only thing we have is a little glimmer of stuff here or there where the Mythbusters did crash cars, 2 cars, one at 50 miles an hour, one at 100 miles an hour, and they crushed exactly proportional to momentum being in control. That is, the twice as fast car crushed twice as much. No evidence of 4 times as much, and certainly if they did the comparison between the 10 and the 10 and the 50, they're not going to come up with 25 times the damage. It's a nonsense belief, right? So they assert it. We have to believe it. They'll call you a name if you disagree, if you say there's no real evidence of this nonsense. It can't possibly be true. It doesn't fit in any, there's just no way to make it fit. It doesn't fit with gears. It breaks the law of the lever. It doesn't fit with hydraulics. It doesn't fit in any, whenever I go to test it, okay? So I can, for example, rocket fuel. I can shoot rocket fuel. I can shoot particles out of a rocket at a mass and velocity. I can calculate the 1/2 mv squared, and I'll get some insanely gigantic number. I calculate the momentum. I get a number thousands of times smaller. And what's the truth? What do I get as the opposite reaction in the spaceship? Oh, that's right, just the momentum number. I don't get any of the kinetic energy. They can't collect it with a ballistic pendulum. And again, it violates 2,000-year-old law of the lever. And they still won't concede, okay, this is worth investigating. I mean, really, if we're going to say it's 25 times the fuel to go 5 times as fast, we really should be able to come up with that experiment. We should be able to prove that. And they don't. And, there are some cranks out there who contrive garbage experiments where they don't take any variables into consideration, and they can create the illusion. Okay, back in the 1720s, to prove this silly theory, they dented clay with round objects. That is, just dented the surface, didn't penetrate it. So the surface is changing the deeper the object goes into the clay. So obviously the thing with twice the velocity, you would say, yes, it's going to go twice as far into the clay. And the trick is As it starts going deeper into clay, the surface changes. And so it starts just pushing clay sideways instead of down and sideways. So it obviously becomes easier to penetrate the further. It's just a simple argument, right? This should fool physicists. Professor Dave essentially can't understand that pointy arrows do go deeper into something, but it doesn't mean they have more energy. So the arrow with a point on it doesn't have more energy. The fact that it goes deeper into a surface doesn't mean it has more energy. He can't understand arguments that simple. And those arguments that simple, prove these silly experiments to be of little or no value. All right, so I just might as well finish the counter side to it, which was MGH, this idea that height in gravity decides how much energy. So 4 times higher in gravity, even though it's only twice the velocity, and you're only in the gravity twice as long. And gravity is a time-dependent force. It's actually right in the formula, 9.8 meters per 1 second. You get 9.8 meters of extra velocity per 1 second. So clearly, if it's only 2 units of time, it's only 2 units of force. You couldn't have collected 4 units of force. You don't have 4 times the energy. You only have twice the velocity. You only have twice the momentum. You can only do twice the work. It's just a garbage, wrong theory. And again, there's, there's, as long as you have garbage in and garbage out, they can make this rational. They can give you a garbage figure for the energy of something, fuel, for example, and give you the exaggerated number, and then they just give you the exaggerated number coming out. But it's garbage. It's wrong. It's inaccurate. It's not correct. So MGH is never the right answer. And the right understanding for gravity is MGT. It's a mass and it's amount of time in free fall. And the important fact is it has to be free falling for the gravitational constant to truly mean something. Because if you don't drop something, it's like lifting something in gravity. See, physics basically says if I hold something in my hand, a mass, in gravity, I'm not doing any work. When, of course, you know you're doing work. And then they'll say if I lift it very slowly, I did the same work as if I lifted it very quickly, because it's just about the distance. They have no concept of the essential part of gravity, which is the time component, that it's how much exposure you get. So they couldn't understand. So I guess Professor Dave can't understand getting a suntan, that it's not about how much you move around in the sun. It's about how long you're in the sun, how many photons hit you. I guess he couldn't understand spray paint, and the fact that the faster you move something through the spray of paint, the less paint is going to get on it. And if we thought of paint as energy, the less energy that gets on it. And the truth is you can slide across thin ice because gravity is a time-dependent force. And the fact is that it's about spreading the amount of your gravity across a gigantic surface will in fact mean you're not going to crash through the surface because your weight per square inch will be much smaller. I mean, easily understood that this is not a good foundation for physics, and to understand that energy is the main subject in physics. I mean, energy is the action in physics. There really isn't any physics without thinking in terms of energy. It's almost a synonym for physics as energy, and they have it wrong. They haven't really thought about it. They haven't been at all skeptical of the old fables and recognize they're just that. And, some of them are really old. Like 1/2 mv squared is 350 years old and never proven. No experiment. The experimental evidence is decisively against, not decisively for. All right, take a pause. All right, leave us continue.
weaponize the word consensus and train people to associate it with corruption. Want people to stay ignorant by avoiding education so that they're easier to manipulate? Tell them that universities are woke Marxist indoctrination camps that put...
Well, whatever. I mean, so not to even accept the fact that some people could find what education has become as mockable. You know, it's classes and, you know, whatever, how to walk straight. I mean, it's so bad. It's really special ed kind of bad. And that most degrees are rubbish garbage. So, and to take that as an attack against the high science degrees is, again, to include a bunch of people who are making a criticism about the mockable nonsense that's been included as the curriculum, when, no, they don't have anything against science education. They want people to go to computer science classes and other kinds of classes that give them actual real skills, not all of these silly community kind of social worker kind of shit that they're calling higher education, when it really is just social propaganda.
Push an evil agenda. Want people to blatantly disregard the expertise of every single person who has dedicated their lives to a particular field of study? Tell them that all...
Oh, so whatever that is, again, nobody's doing any of that crap. So again, it's just this insane exaggeration. So here in defense of science, he's committing all kinds of lies and deception. So he's in a courtroom talking about these principles and that the truth must be defended and we must be compelled by the evidence. And then he goes on a diatribe just making up a bunch of fake facts. Look at that guy, he's ugly, he must be guilty.
All the scientists are corrupt liars.
So that's not what they're saying. So again, he's exaggerating all the scientists. No, they're just arguing that an awful lot of the science looks like show science. It looks like it doesn't really have a purpose except for some way for the company to sell, like it's into quantum and it's into this and it's doing these fancy fun things, and it's all crap. Show, not go. Too much of it is poorly motivated, let's just say. And then you have the whole influence of the military-industrial complex. And those are probably the only reason why certain science gets investment, is because it might have a weaponizable utility. So they don't do any fundamental science because, yeah, they're not going to reinvent. You know, they're not going to discover some new dynamite. But yeah, a gravitational wave detector might be a good listening device. And obviously a super colliding whatever monstrosity might produce some kind of super nuke weapon.
Shilling for a big whatever, so that they'll be receptive to the lies being pushed by some charlatan on the internet.
So we know that no charlatan on the internet is persuading anyone reasonable. So there's no reasonable person who's got a reasonable high school education in basic evolution and science that's being convinced by the flat earthers. That isn't happening. So it's a non-existent threat.
It's a classic tactic.
Lying is a classic tactic, and you're full of it. Okay, preposterous the most proven theory in the history of mankind. Oh, because their circular math said, well, here, we have an experiment that comes up with a number, and because we keep predicting our own experiment's number, that somehow it's the most proven theory of the mankind. I mean, it's you know, I don't want to get crude, but I mean, it's like somebody sniffing their own farts to prove how much they smell. I mean, it's just too fucking ridiculous.
No, most of my debunks seek to combat disinformation.
Right. It's not disinformation. It's clearly just propaganda, and it's just religious veiled jargon. Flat Earth is a religious theory. It's nothing else. I mean, they're just trying to throw us back 2,000 years and force us to live in the biblical universe, and it's just a waste of time. But see, this is their only victory they can master, is they have to find the dumbest and the sickest. You know, and it's all, some of these people are actually schizophrenically sick person on Earth, and defeat them to prove how brilliant they are. but they're afraid of me. I can't pay them to show up. I can't pay him, say, $500 to respond to me. But he'll respond to them because he gets rewarded for it, because all of these weak asses who really can't defend their garbage against real arguments, they're afraid of the fight. They will kick you off any forum you attempt to argue something like kinetic energy. They'll kick you off the forum. You're not allowed to show the inconsistencies. You're not allowed to show the paradoxes. You're not allowed to say something like, well, why don't you show me it being impossible for a lever to make a half mass go twice the velocity? That is, conserve momentum. Why don't you show me levers not conserving momentum? They won't do it.
Expose charlatans and explain precisely how they are lying. But another approach to solving this problem involves demystifying science for the public.
So again, for whatever that is, this public thing where, if telling them to explaining science when it's complicated, okay? I mean, not all of it is as obvious as the pointy arrow thing, okay? Some of the arguments are a little more subtle than the obvious argument that don't be fooled by pointy arrows going further, because it doesn't mean they have more energy. They've tricked you. They've taken advantage of a variable in the experiment. So yes, most of physics isn't going to be that simple, but it's really not that complicated either, like the simple thrust argument. How can you tell me that the fuel has all of these joules of energy when I can't use any of it? When the only joules I'm going to get are the momentum. So the momentum says there's 2 joules. Their kinetic energy theory says there's 2 million. I won't get the 2 million. I can't make it do any work. And they keep claiming that kinetic energy is the definition of work. You see, I mean, it's just so silly. And they won't address any of these arguments. They won't ever show me anything requiring 25 times the fuel to do 5 times of anything. Because it doesn't happen. Because it's not a real theory.
In addition to
it's certainly not a scientific theory.
Neutralizing lies, we have to rehabilitate public perception of the scientific community.
So you're not going to do that with anything but start making your science a little more connected to real hard evidence. So this is the perfect place for me to talk about Einstein's silly claim that light is twice as bent by gravity. So you have this dirt simple experiment in a sense, okay? The idea is simple. You're just going to look at a star in the gravitational field of another star. So you're going to look at a little bright spot in the universe by looking as the light goes past another gravitational body. And what the argument is that somehow that light, those photons, will be bent by the force of gravity. Now, the premise argument is in every other circumstance, there's no example of a force ever influencing a force. So I can't bend magnetism with something, and I can't, no other forces ever. Photons can't bend photons. They can't move them. They can't distort them. They can't change them. You always need the catalyst of matter to make a force interact with a force. And so we have this one example of where it does happen, and we're supposed to believe in this one example something amazing happens where somehow the lightest, smallest thing in the universe is twice as affected by gravity. All right, so anyway, so they do an experiment in 1919, kind of garbage. I mean, the guy writes in his own journal, I got 10% of the data quality, and I wouldn't stake my life on these results. And yet, the New York Times headlines, Einstein proven right. That was the headline. So I'm just saying, you see that they talk about having something called integrity, but there's no integrity here. And so the trick is that, okay, if you want to do the experiment from Earth, it's kind of a pain in the ass because you can't see through the atmosphere very well. And especially this is exactly the kind of experiment the atmosphere really screws up. And you need an eclipse because you can't use a telescope in daylight and you can't see anything because of all the refracted light. So space, now that we're in it, creates this gigantic advantage, 400 times better seeing. So it's an image that's 400 times more pixels, more detail. Gigantic advantage, humongous advantage. I can't even describe how, 4 times would be great, 40 times would be great, 400 times better is so gigantic. And so it makes the experiment so much easier because even if you have 100 times less telescope, you're still 300 times ahead. So you don't need much of a camera, and you can do it from space at any time, and you don't need an eclipse. And they've never even attempted the experiment. So we're supposed to believe they've never even attempted to do an experiment that was never verified by being redundantly done over and over again, coming up with perfect results. And to top that off, it's the kind of physics where you could actually show people. It's not a bunch of data sheets with numbers. It's not a bunch of synthetic information. It's not. It's completely image data. So it's something you could actually show people and say, here's the UFO. You could show them the Sasquatch image. This experiment is the only experiment that gives you hard, undeniable, irrefutable evidence. And it's the one they haven't done from space. So of all the ways to test, this test is the simplest, and it's the most decisive if it produces the results. So what it'll basically do, look, you could sit there and look at the sun. You just block that part out with a camera. You just look at the space around it, and guess what? All the stars should be swirling in all kinds of funky ways, okay? In the sense that there should be lots of distortion in their paths. And they'll synthesize a blender image to show us what that would look like, but they won't do the real experiment and show us the real effect, because guess what? It doesn't happen. They can't make it happen. So they have tried it, and it just doesn't work. And so they haven't published anything because it didn't work. But they didn't publish the fact that, well, we tried it and it didn't work. Can't see it. Can't find it. Can't make it happen. But that's the kind of thing where they show their duplicity. Because they're really not about the evidence. They're not about showing people the truth. They are just about arguing their silly nonsense that is so abstract and so untangible and so distant from anything called hard evidence. And they want you to believe all that crap that they can't prove. It's disgusting.
You see, most people don't know a single scientist. They have no idea what scientists...
Okay, so whatever this concept of scientist, right? So the difference between some technician, okay, doing some technical job, looking at slides in a microscope all day or some kind of crap, that's okay. It's not really science, all right? That's just technical skill. Science is the real investigator work. It's the difference between, say, the lawyer and the detective. You really do have to make a distinction between the professional who's out to acquire, provide, create, present the evidence, and people who are just starting lawnmowers, pushing the button and cranking the cranker and then hitting the knowing a procedure. Okay, proceduralists are one thing. Real research is another thing. And figuring out how to do experiments, that's science. The rest of it's...
This makes them more likely to fall for these anti-science narratives because they have no real-life examples to compare with.
So this is kind of silly. Like, nobody knows an engineer, nobody knows this, and nobody... that's just crap. But the fact is their theory, it remains they can't convince each other. They talk like, oh yeah, well, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. They joke about how incomprehensible and silly and nonsensical their own theories are. So let's talk about gravity. This is a perfect example again, where you're not going to be able to explain it to somebody, 12-year-old kid, 13-year-old kid, and you're going to sit there and say, all right, well, okay, yes, it's perfectly like a light bulb in the sense that it creates this inverse square law. So as the photons come out, they spread in two directions. They spread this way and they spread that way. So the photons get further and further apart, the bits of energy, let's just say. And so it's like spray paint. So the further away I am, the less paint hits me. And it does it by this quadratic effect. So I go twice the distance, I get hit by 4 times less paint. I go 3 times the distance, it's 9 times less. I go 4 times the distance, it's 16 times less paint is hitting me. So that's a simple concept. And you say, okay, now we're going to talk about this thing called gravity. And it does exactly the same thing as the photons, except in reverse. So instead of something pushing you out, something's pushing you in. Okay, pulling you in, doesn't really matter. All right, for the sake of the argument, I'd say it's more logical to recognize it's a push-averse. So even that argument, right, I could just make the argument. You could talk to a 13-year-old kid and you could say, well, what do you think? Elementally, if I was to make a universe out of just things, okay, and empty space, push you can get, right? Because all I have to have is things hit each other. Now I've got push. But how do I make a pull? I mean, is a pull really the opposite of a push? I mean, is there something called an opposite of a collision? No, there really isn't. There's no opposite of a collision. There's no way to uncollision. There's no way to anti-collision. So yeah, it's a push-averse. All right, so gravity is a pushing in force. It's, the universe is full of heat, pressure, and it's pushing everything together. That makes perfectly good sense, frankly. Anyway, so you're telling the 13-year-old, okay, they have this theory that explains the inverse square law. Okay, and the theory isn't that there's some kind of, like, you're shooting force into a filament and burning it and pieces are flying out of it. No, the theory is that this bent geodesical thing, the empty space, is bent. So the stuff that's nothing, basically, I mean, I could go out and get a jar of it for you and bring it down and say, see, nothing, vacuum. That stuff's bent somehow. And that this magical capacity for that stuff to bend, theoretically, is somehow creating an inverse square law. But you're saying the inverse square law is in all directions. I mean, it's spherical. So even that how does that even make sense? So they use bent fabric, which is just such a cheat. Because obviously it's in all directions. It's happening in all directions. So bent fabric isn't an explanation. So I'm sure you could end up just saying, look, as a 13-year-old, you're allowed to say, I don't get it. That sounds like crap. And if you give a kid a chance to say those words, I'm sure they'll say, that doesn't make sense. It sounds like crap. What do you think? You just made that up, right? You don't have any evidence there's some kind of bent geodesical thingy, some bent something or other that's somehow, I don't even know what it's doing. How exactly is it making the inverse square law? How is it doing it? So it's a non-explanation. I mean, Einstein's explanation it's vacuous. There's no there. There's absolutely no explanation of gravity. There's just an explanation. There's just a description of the inverse square law, and basically saying it happens. It just magically happens that there's an inverse square law. That's it. There's nothing else. There's no physical explanation. Now, I could argue I have a physical explanation in the sense that, yes, the universe is made out of these little bits of stuff called force. And the fact is, when force is pushing matter, okay, it's not going as fast. So something going the speed of light, all the force bits are going the speed of light. When they're pushing a piece of matter, they're going much slower. And that's what absorbs energy out of the universe, essentially, okay, because the force bits are now not getting where they would be because they're going much, much slower, right? It's like the car ran out of, no, it's a bad example. It's a Sisyphus. It's a person pushing something. If I make you carry a baby elephant, you don't walk as fast, and you don't get to the store at the same time. But if you don't have to carry it, you get there fast, blah, 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 blah. So in a sense, I've stolen your energy, forcing you to push matter. So anytime matter's moving, it means energy's being absorbed, which means that the physical thing, when the energy goes into the earth, less of it comes out because it's delayed, it's slowed down. It's doing work inside the Earth. That's why the Earth is molten, by the way, is because it's doing a lot of jiggling of electrons and protons. So its energy is occupied doing this crap. It does at a lot slower speed. And so it just doesn't get to the surface at the same time. And therefore, it's more goes in than comes out at any one instant. And that's gravity. So there are counter explanations to their dogmatic religion, but they won't engage and they won't explain how that can't be true. They won't do any of that. Because they're cowards defending a fable. They're just another version of religious fanatic. All right, take a pause. All right, another thing that should be said is he just keeps talking about scientists, and these are really different sciences. So like chemistry and biology are completely different in terms of maintaining integrity because they're about effects. And effects, you can't fuck with effects nearly as easy as it is to make up crap about a cause. So physics is about describing causes, and describing causes is a lot harder to do, elemental ones, than it is to describe effects. So the other two sciences, whatever, the other sciences have more credibility because they actually have to produce effective drugs, let's say, or they have to produce some sort of, it has to match the statistical outcomes. It's about events and outcomes, where physics is about describing causes, and physics has screwed it up because they can. Now, if the other sciences had less scrutiny, in terms of the car didn't have to work, if you could make cars that didn't work, then they could get away with shit, but they can't. So they can't make crap up, but physicists can, and that's the difference. The biology and chemistry are real sciences because what's established as statements has to be true. It can't be a made up mush because it's about effects. And physics, it can be made up mush because the effect is all that matters. The idea that energy is conserved is all that matters. Whether you call it 1/2 mv squared or you call it mv, doesn't matter. Now the fact is both can't be conserved and blah 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 blah, and that's what just demonstrates the fact that they just don't care about the truth, because it's demonstrably paradoxical. All right, continuing.
But what if scientists could show people exactly who they are, what they do, and why?
So none of that will shore up the credibility of scientists. Because really, again, you have to show them why you believe what you claim to be true. So science isn't just doing science, producing potato chips more efficiently. Okay, it really is about this. Explain why this works or that works. Why oil, rises to the surface of the water, or why, and that's the part they just can't do effectively or reasonably, is explain any of the why they believe. And but explaining how it's more efficient to do a certain thing, that's not much in the way of science, in my opinion anyway. It's not the same thing as science. Cooking is not science.
This was precisely my thinking in starting my Get to Know a Scientist series.
So whatever that is, and whatever horrible, awful tripe that must be, and ooh, yuck.
This began years ago with one piece I produced on a UCLA geophysicist, but then I pivoted to having researchers submit pieces they produced themselves, and I received 8 such submissions ending a few years ago.
Wow, whoop-de-doo, right? So a whole 8. So, it's just all this scientific literacy in this audience, right? We're talking about sometimes millions of views, and this is the best they can do. I mean, really, there's just nothing. All there are these talking heads, the ones that get the views, and the rest are semi-employed, I guess, school teachers. And there's really no one else talking physics. There just isn't. It's just this vacuum of people just interested in these subjects and wanting to discuss the evidence. There's absolutely no evidence. They want to discuss evidence.
Go. These are great pieces that were sent to me by an entomologist, a geneticist, a marine ecologist, a plant biologist.
So these are all shit, just not very. Yes, it's very nice. Even curing diseases is nice, but it's a whole different kind of science, okay, than the physics.
A biochemist, a bioengineer, a herpetologist, and a neuroscientist. Here is a quick montage of some of the footage from their videos.
All right, boring,
As you can see,
boring.
footage of them in action, doing their thing. They are telling...
doing their thing, So, I mean, just... bleh. Blah. So, certainly it's not interesting to me because it's not physics. None of it's physics. None of it. Oyster research.
The only reason I stopped putting these out is because I stopped getting submissions. But it's time...
Yeah, no interest. That's why. Yes, why don't you just say, colossal lack of interest.
Time to revive this playlist. Never has it been more important than now to...
So, it really isn't important. Again, you want to give science credibility. You don't show scientists doing good stuff like checking to see if water's clean or something. That's not going to do it. And again, it's not science that's on trial. It's the part of science defining the truth that's on trial. And that part has done a lousy job. So let's talk about entanglement, the QED, quantum mechanics. So this is where all the woo started, and it all started with the two-slit experiment. Now, the first lie is that Young did something miraculous that nobody else did, and he discovered something. He didn't do any such thing. So Newton had already done the single hole experiment, okay, and he had done the single impediment experiment, piece of hair. And he had seen fringes. So fringes were known, it was a real thing, blah, 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 blah. So this is happening 200 years later. Young claiming that he did something new or he found something new, not real. Okay, fringes were already a well-known effect. So that's part of the whole mystique, lie, whatever bullshit of physics, is that it implies that fringes were discovered by Young, and it wasn't discovered then. All right, the concept that light shoots off at these lined intervals. Newton already described much of that in detail. Okay, these lines. So that was fringes were already well established. Now the explanation for them wasn't. So there was this wave-particle duality crapola, this idea that somehow the wavists had to prove their religion. And so Young was a big wave advocate. He was a sound engineer and a doctor, sort of obsessed with the whole idea of vibrations and waves. And so he threw light into that category. And the simple argument is that he didn't do a double slit experiment in the sense that he cheated the experiment dramatically by taking two open slits and essentially making them so narrow that there couldn't be a wavelength of difference from them if they were a single slit. So if I had a single slit as narrow as his slits, it wouldn't produce any fringes, because it's not enough. There's not enough difference between the point sources, frankly, the surfaces. And so you wouldn't get any fringes. So it's like combining two sources that produce no fringes, and then you got fringes. Well, what he basically did is take the four-source experiment, that is four surfaces, and he converted it into the two-source experiment. So he used two slits to create a single slit pattern, if you can understand me. The fact is that a true double slit with open slits creates two patterns, one on top of the other. So there's a pattern of little dots, and then the little dots are also in a pattern of node, node, node. And it has distinct features. A double maxima is created. And the fact is that all you have to do to predict the pattern is to measure distances between surfaces. So a single slit, this is the only distance you have between the surfaces, because the surfaces are causing the effect. Photons that go by the surface are the fringe light. Photons that go straight through, go straight through. That's why in the single slit, the center maxima is very, very bright, because most of the photons just go straight through. They don't hit anything. They don't get disturbed. They don't get diffracted. The ones going by the surfaces do. So anyway, it's the two-surface experiment. And the same thing's true with the single impediment. It's the two-surface experiment, except the surfaces are going to be very close together, so you're going to get very big pattern, where in the open thing, you can make it any distance you want. Now, you can do it with the single impediment. You can make a very thick impediment, and then you'll get a lot more pattern. And so that's really all that matters, is this distance, because it's going to act as a point source. There's going to be reference material coming from here and reference material coming from here, and it's going to combine in another location, and you're just looking for it being in phase and out of phase, and that's it. So it's just changing the phase. There's no interference of any kind. So it either matches the phase or it doesn't. There's a 50-50 chance. So I have a linear line here. Everything is getting bent left and right. No up and down, just left and right. So all the fringe light goes through, hits the surfaces, and so if I use an aperture, a round aperture, I'll get rings. Okay, so it's the same exact pattern, and one of them, if you use slits, you're just making it linear. You're making it just go in the one direction rather than in 360 degrees of direction. And so the whole thing can be explained. So obviously when I take two single slits, okay, that only have two sources, one distance, and I combine them, I create a new distance here, right? This is also a new distance, but it's more than likely it's going to be the same as this distance. And the fact is, it perfectly explains the pattern. The new, bigger distance between two surfaces is creating the little nodes, because there's lots of wavelengths of difference. So the big triangle base, if I have a triangle with a big base, I can have lots of lines with a different length. But if I have a small base in a triangle, then I can have no line, no wavelength of difference. That is, I'll never have a difference bigger than the base of the triangle. So the bigger the base, the more places there'll be a change in phase, a wavelength of difference in the length of the line, full wavelength. And so the outside, the furthest distance between two surfaces will accurately tell you exactly where the little dots are, and the shortest distance between two surfaces will tell you the envelope pattern. Fact. Okay, now they won't deal with that argument, they won't deal with this subject, and it just decisively proves there's no such thing as superpositions, there's no entanglements, there's no interference. Okay, another experiment that proves it is you can have two radio sources, and you can have your antenna in the middle, your receiver, and the two radio sources can't interfere with each other, and they'll hit the antenna, and all you do is move the antenna or move one of the sources, and you'll change in phase, out of phase, in phase, out of phase. You'll create an interference pattern, and the sources never interfered. They never traveled into each other. They never mixed. So it's just made up. It's a fable that this has something to do with waves, and that it doesn't have anything, that it doesn't matter. Like Feynman, Richard Feynman's theory is it doesn't matter where the photon goes through. It gets diffracted. When it's so obvious that, no, it only gets diffracted when it hits a surface. That's why if I make the aperture really small, all of the light gets fringed. If I make it very big, then there's a big bright spot in the middle, okay, and less fringe light. So obvious. So this isn't about some magical opening thing that creates fringes. It's about surfaces. So it's the two surface experiment, the single slit, and the four surface experiment, the double slit. And then you can have multiple slits. And again, it follows the same rule where you're basically creating lots of sources very far apart. That means you're creating very tiny little nodes of light, and it's just about when you have a whole bunch of them in one area, you end up with a spot that's brighter than the other spots, and you can see the difference. And that's it. It's all mathematical, proven by their own math. Their own math uses the distance between the surfaces to define the phenomenon, meaning that they're acknowledging it's about the surfaces as point sources. It works perfectly. It's a perfectly simple explanation. No nonsense. No need for a paradox. No need for the duality, wave particle. Just an understanding that whatever a photon is, it can in fact be broken, and then you can remake it. And the polarizing film proves that. So I can do a polarizing experiment where two polarizing films kill all the photons coming out, and I can stick a new one in a diagonal, and all of a sudden our photons go through again, which means I must have fixed something that was just broken. I didn't make photons, I just prevented them from being broken. Simple explanation works perfectly. And such. Alright, continuing.
Show the public precisely who scientists are and what they do, because the impression...
Alright, so again, it's not about scientists, it's about the critique of the fringes of what would be called the theorist and the agenda, the people deciding what's important. Quantum computing, that kind of nonsense, and how the money's going to get spent, and what we should care about, and what is important, and wormholes and black hole mystique, made up crap again. They talk about it as if it's a hard science when it's as soft and mushy a science as you can get. It's so layered in imprecise and incomplete information, and yet they talk with such authority. So in a case of something like relativity, again, the Einstein argument that somehow photons don't tell time, that they somehow, if I had a light clock, that is, if I had a clock where it just sent a photon that bounces off a surface and bounces back, that somehow it doesn't do that in the same amount of time if I move the source and the mirror. And those two things aren't going to change anything. The photon is going to take exactly the same amount of time to move, hit the mirror. So even if I move the mirror at half the speed of light, the photon is going to go across at exactly the same speed it would if the mirror was stationary. Can't make any difference. The photon will hit the mirror, theoretically. It has to stay stationary for a millisecond and bounce off, and it's going to take the same amount of time to bounce back, and you can't change that time. But they'll draw you a picture of the photon hitting the mirror lower because the mirror moved, so they'll draw it as if the photon went down and then bounced at an angle. It didn't do any of those things. It didn't do this diagonal line. The photon moves straight across. If you want to draw it as a diagonal, it's okay, but it still moves straight across. It was still going this way, and it was not going that way. Photons can't have two momentums. They can only have one direction they're moving in. They can't move in two directions. So again, it's just absolute nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. It's paradoxical as hell, the whole argument. Okay, so if you accelerated me and I had a clock, the clock is going to tell the same time as the one back on Earth until I start destroying the material structure, in the sense that all of my matter will be moving the speed of light in a direction, and therefore I can't have charge anymore, and I can't have electrons and protons in any coherent way. All of the other forces that would be affecting the material will break down. So I would argue you can't push matter at the speed of light, because the matter falls apart. Matter that's atomic. You can do it to a single electron or a single proton, but you can't do it to any complex object. So, but there's no reason to believe this. This was Newton's first argument in his Principia book, the most famous science book ever written. Okay, his first argument was an attack of relativity, ironically. Because people were already puffing and huffing about wave theories and a mushy understanding of physical dynamics, and Newton was grounding it and saying, no, there's empty space and there's things in the empty space, and yes, things can have, they can share a condition, and everything seems quite normal because they share that condition, and everything else is what they don't share. So they'll still behave just like everything else will be the same, except they're both moving in some direction. And that's the only relativity there is. But there's absolute space. There's real things moving, things that aren't moving. There's real positions in space. And he argued that aggressively. And he proved it with a bucket experiment where he spun a bucket and posed the argument that what's your realistic speculation, that the whole universe spun? Well, if the whole universe spins, that's not going to change how much gravity is affecting the bucket. So the water's not going to go up the sides. Okay, it's not going to happen. The bucket has to be moving because that's the only way you can make the water move. And the water has to be moving for it to creep up the side of the bucket. It was a very decisive argument. They really haven't debunked it in any way, but they're claiming that somehow they have. They're just claiming victory. They haven't made any coherent argument explaining how, yes, the theory is if the whole universe spins, it creates more gravity, because there's no way to make that true. So it's made up garbage religion. It's not fact. It's not proven. We don't have an obligation as intelligent people to believe what they say and recite it like a catechism. It's just a religion. The science of physics is a religion.
The impression they are receiving from the media and from the White House is grossly inaccurate. People have to understand that.
So we know this is just about fringe issues, okay? Gun nuts, virus, anti-vaxxers who, have some notion that they're all trying to kill them or something. So whatever the bullshit is, they're trying to sell chemicals. They all have stock in Merck or something, and they're all trying to make big bucks just injecting everybody with chemicals. Yeah, so what? That's just reality. That's not about science. They're not making, a clinical science argument. They're just assuming you're all... the irony is they're the thieves. Okay, the Republicans are the ones more likely to be selling you the defective product that they can make a buck on. The razor blade in your apple. But whatever. It's hardly a threat to science altogether, the fact that there are people who don't like social policies.
Scientists are not greedy shills pushing an establishment agenda.
Well, there are a lot of them that are, though. And frankly, all of them, all you talking shits on the internet, with your high view numbers, are just propagandists. You just make up any kind of shit and you can dupe and fool the common morons.
Or shifty charlatans lying for grant money.
Yeah, that's all. You're just lying for t-shirt money. Lame, shitty shirts. Crass product selling. That's it. Brilliant. You're just in it for the bucks.
But rather passionate, underpaid professionals expanding the collective knowledge of the human species.
Yeah, well, it's just propaganda, so there's no collective knowledge being expanded, just absolute bullshit.
Can become more aware of this reality, they will be less likely to fall for ridiculous anti-establishment narratives.
Okay, well, some of them aren't absolutely ridiculous. You could argue fluorine forever. There's lots of subjects where circumcision, you could argue forever. Okay, apparently. And they're so really hard to test. Okay, it's really hard to do the 50-year outcome test. Okay, they should have done it by now, frankly. But no, they haven't. And let's just prove that, yes, vegetarian diet, you're likely to live 10 years longer. All the things they should just get around to proving, okay, and ending the debate with morons.
So everyone out there, if you are a scientist of any kind and you're interested in being featured on my channel,
So a scientist of any kind, meaning somebody who has gone to the appropriate university and acquired the seal of you were dumbass enough to believe the shit we fed you.
you know what to do. Whether you're tenured faculty or a first-year graduate
See, yes, but there won't be anything like, well, whether you spent your whole life thinking about the mechanics of the universe and how it functions, and especially if you have, you'd almost say, especially if you have some view that we have something wrong, please show up and let's talk about it. But he's not going to suggest that.
student, if you do any research in the lab or in the field, the world needs to hear from you. You're a
brother.
herpetologist and
Sorry.
a neuroscientist. Grandma.
Yeah.
But rather,
My
graduate
bad.
student, if you do any research in the lab or in the field, the world needs to hear from you.
Why? I mean, really, no one cares. I mean, and they'll be incredibly boring and incredibly inarticulate, and they'll just talk about how fun it is to go scuba diving. And I give the oysters names. I have like Oyster Fred and Jimmy, and then Sarah the oyster. Yeah, we feed them poo. Yeah, it's fun.
Show us what equipment you use. Show us what you do every day. Tell us why it matters to you and why it should matter to us too.
Right. So most science is not going to be science, right? So just understand, they're just looking at poo samples in a microscope all day, just looking, just testing, just manufacturing. Most scientists are stuck doing pretty shitty shit. Yes.
Shoot me an email at professordaveexplains@gmail.com to talk to me about submitting a profile.
So again, yeah, just bullshit, right? Right, you got to jump through my hoops and submit your profile. Duh. Anyway, just crap. All right, so we'll call this part 1, because these other subjects deserve talk. The expansion argument, silly. Entropy, that they say the universe is energy deprived, that somehow it's falling apart when you have this huge anti-entropy thing happening, gravity, right in front of your face, this gigantic anti-entropy event, gravity, and they don't consider it at all. The strong force, which is another just invented nonsense. Well, let's just make up some explanation for why there's a lot of energy in a nucleus. Yeah, those protons sure are close to each other. There must be some... It's kind of ironic, right? That gravity's a pull force, but somehow the strong force is a push force. But then when they actually create a gluon, it ends up being a pull force again. It's just so bad. And in time, I've already touched upon that a little bit. Charge and magnetism, and then friction, thinking of friction as a force when friction should always be thought of as an exchange. Friction is just about having contact and exchanging a condition. That's all it ever is. There's no force of friction. It's just so stupid to call it a force. There's no such force. It's a sink. It's a way of dissipating energy. Probably another way to say that. It's transfer. It's transferring energy. There's no force. There's just a transfer. Shit. It's just so stupid to think of friction, to define friction as a force is just so wrong. Ugh. All right. So anyway, till the next time and such and so forth and what.